I read Creative Quest by Questlove, which is the stage name of Ahmir Thompson. And he is one of the front men for the band The Roots. And Creative Quest is a nonfiction book about his approach to creativity. This is a reread for me. I haven't read it in a few years. I think I got it around the time that it came out. And it's interesting to reread it now in a time of AI because there's a lot of stuff in here about being online and growing up, during the 80s and 90s and then being like an online person and having a professional career and stuff. And so I just wonder what Questlove's thoughts of current online culture are. This is from back in 2018. So it's been close to a decade since the book came out. But there's a lot more in it than just like online stuff. It's a really approachable book. I'm not a musician or anything, but I'm interested in what musicians think about stuff because it's just a part of the art scene that I don't grok very well. I've never connected deeply to music, and so I'm just always interested in the perspective of people who come from that world. And he's so knowledgeable, and his expertise runs so deep, obviously, throughout the book. And he's such a creative guy, obviously. I mean, he co-wrote the book. He has like a ghostwriter who helps him, which is pretty common for projects like this. But he did make an effort to write, and it's not his first book project that he did in this. And then he also talks about running various restaurants and working with chefs. And then he does a lot of DJ work. I know that he has various podcasts and different kinds of shows that he's done over the years. And that's in addition to being in a band that is on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and all of that stuff. So just a really prolific guy, has an interesting mind. He's funny and charming, and all of that comes through in the book. Structurally, these types of books tend to fall into two broad categories, I'd say. At least the books that I've read, and this is just according to my own, what I've noticed. So one category would be a kind of bullet pointed action list of ideas that you can take and make them into actionable processes that you can slot into your own life. And they might even have worksheets included in the book and stuff like that. And so it would lay out the author's process and thoughts and whatever, and then tell you do A, do B, do C with the goal of this outcome. Just a very broken down for you, and you just fill in the blank kind of a situation. And then the second kind that come from this is very personal and based on introspection from the author, and includes a lot of anecdotes from their life or kind of distilled almost parables from their own experience that they then lay out here's the wisdom that came out of this thing, whether that's a failure or a success. And it tends to be, I've noticed that the first kind of author lays out a lot of successes, and the second kind lays out a lot of failures or frustrations. And so I'd put Questlove in the second group. The Creative Quest book is more anecdotal. It's more filled with frustrations, stumblings, failures. And he notes the high stuff too, all of the successes that he's had along the way, but he concentrates more on how the process of creativity operates for him personally, the role of failure in creativity, the role of boredom and cultivating situations of boredom. I really like a thing that he talks about where he tries to interact with meditation and whatnot, and it's not super successful for him, but he is able to talk about a process of thinking really quickly in high pressure situations, which, works well for him given that, they work on a late night TV show, or that he has to work with all different kinds of musical acts, or getting on SNL and having to pivot to work with various bands in that venue as well. And so like they'll be doing a live show. He talks about like doing a live show at one point and like running out of time because this act is like they're going to get done, but the guy who's the next act is not there yet. And so they need to fill in the time. And he has to be creative about like how are they going to do that? And just like making snap choices that solve that problem really quickly. And so creativity comes up in all different kinds of concepts like that. That's kind of a leadership style creativity problem. He talks about solving problems around songwriting, around career choices, and then also what it's like to put your creative work out there, like in the form of a DJ set that he did, and how he got feedback from the crowd that he was working with that they weren't really interested in his very sophisticated arrangement of various songs, and how putting these songs together was kind of saying a thing or taking the crowd on a journey. And instead, they just wanted to hear like top 40 hits, fun dance songs, and whatever. And he like went along with it, and the experience of how that made him feel, and just how that synthesized and went into his process of work. And he kind of saw it as like a somewhat of a failure. Like he didn't enjoy it happening, but he did it. And there was a kind of like, self-conscious, like, what am I doing kind of a thing. And like feeling bad about his set getting thrown out. But at the same time, enjoying how much the crowd loved it, and that people came up to him and said, this was really great, or it was one of your best DJ sets, which is not really what he wanted to hear, because it was like his entire process was thrown out. And so like, on the one hand, you want to get good reviews, but you want to get the good reviews for the thing that you think is good, and he talks about struggling with that. And so all of that I think is like really vulnerable and interesting. And he talks a lot about how the process can be of being creative and engaging with creativity can be cumbersome or clumsy. And like the cover of the book has like this Rube Goldberg style drawing of a machine that is supposed to be like playing a record, but a whole bunch of steps have to go into making this very simple operation happen. And that is kind of how creativity works a lot of times, that there feels like way too many steps to get to the end point that you're engineering in the creative process. But there's a lot more that goes into creativity than simply producing a product. And he also addresses that, and how the process itself can be a source of renewal for the artist, and that there's like a feeding of your spirit that happens in making art that is necessary for the artist, and that creativity is less of a choice in that way, but is more of a necessity. And that by doing the same kinds of things, which is what, when you're producing a literal creative product for the marketplace, for capitalism, that it can move you into a space where that's all you get to create, because it's like the thing that you're known for. And that is going to erode your spirit and your relationship to the art that you're creating, because you're not really creating the same thing. You're just starting to like reproduce. And so sometimes you need to take a break from whatever it is that you're doing, and even move into different forms of creativity or expression. And so he talks about how like some painters became filmmakers, or you had filmmakers who dabble in music or whatever. And, as I said, he wears a lot of hats himself and all kinds of various things. And so that seems like a real keystone to his creative process, is to be doing a lot of different things. He's even like a professor at a university, which I didn't mention either. So like he's just doing so many things. But that seems to give him more fuel, I guess is what I'm saying, instead of tiring him out. But mostly he tries to get across to people that it is a process and that it can be complicated and kind of cumbersome, and that there's this narrative out there in the world that creativity is associated with like some kind of genius or something, that there's like a deep insight that a person has and then just boom, they make whatever the art is and it's no big deal, and that's just like a kind of performance or a misconception that people have about what creativity is. It's not a flash of genius. I mean, like sometimes it can have that, but it has to have this entire process all around it. And those flashes of genius are more likely to happen when there's a commitment to process that's happening in the first place. And he also emphasizes the role that like networks of people play in that whole thing, not only in the opportunities that they can bring, but also in kind of sparking the connections and creativity that are going to happen with making art. And so like somebody in your group might have an idea or a take, and then you like support that idea, and that now you have an idea that's building off of their idea. Like he talks about how improv works. At one point, somebody has an idea and then the next person has a yes and that builds on it, and that you can build music that way, you can build stories, you can build whatever. And then when you have the right people and you get the right kind of feedback, all of that can kind of create some real magic that produces some great art. The book itself is full of humor. It's a little bit wry in its tone. It's a little bit meta at various times of like, oh, did I just choose that word? Did I just make a joke there? Which is kind of fun. You can feel that the creativity in the process is bringing a joy for Questlove that I think comes across in the language, I guess is what I'm saying, which is charming in its own way and makes it more of a fun read than for me anyway, than the kind of bullet pointed type books that I mentioned in the kind of other category, so to speak. And so even though I'm not like a direct fan of the Roots' work, I know basically nothing about the band or Questlove's work or just music culture in general, because it's just not my jam. Like obviously I'm just reading books all the time and not really listening to music because that's just how my hyper focus works. But despite that, I think this is a really well written book. It feels deeply considered and authentic. And like I said, it's very charming and a lot of personality comes through, and that's not easy to deliver in a nonfiction book, I think. And this book has a lot of personal, vulnerable details in it that are rewarding on a reread to like contemplate the arc of his life, how creativity is a central component of how he lives his life, and then how he's just a pretty down-to-earth guy in some ways and is a part of, the wider American culture, and just talks about what it's like to be a person, on the internet, struggling with like social media, struggling with how your body works in terms of a schedule and being up in the middle of the night or like very early in the morning, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., because that's when his creativity works. But there's nobody else around when that's happening. And so that's a struggle for him. And all of those things just kind of win me over. Like, it doesn't matter how I feel about music or my relationship to his work, because he brings me over anyway with just the quality of the writing itself, I think, and his approach to embedding the actual creative process in the work. So you can feel that joy and that spark that he talks about as you're going along through the book. It does make me want to kind of search out if he's had any other follow-ups in this kind of thing. I know that he has a show and stuff. I should probably check it out just to see like his thoughts on the current world of like the online discourse and where that's gone, as it relates to his thoughts in 2018 in like AI and creativity around that and things of that sort. Because I'm just curious, because he talks about like on the one hand, how we use the internet as an offloading tool for we don't have to remember certain things, or like something starts to tickle your memory and you're just instantly able to gratify that curiosity and be like, oh yeah, that's the thing from the thing. Okay, I got it now. And instead, if you didn't have that instant gratification, there can be that can be a seed of a creative endeavor that can unfold for you out of the boredom of like, well, I'm not going to remember it, but man, this thing is really bothering me. And then you just build your own thing out of that. And you find some mental satisfaction in a roundabout way. But just having at your fingertips the ability to like whatever mental impulse you're having, satisfying it can short circuit creativity. And I just wonder, like with the use of AI and stuff, you put out there, you just tell the AI, like, draw a picture of this or make a movie of that. And you just instantly, like, whatever idea you had noodling around in your head, and now, oh, boom, there it is. And I see it, and wow, there's a flash of satisfaction, but it doesn't feed you the way that the process does of like problem solving. How do I get from my idea to a finished product? And that's a difficult process that I get that people who advocate for these kind of tools feel like, I don't have the time or the wherewithal. But I just kind of think like that's the whole point of being here, in this world, is to engage in these processes because they're so much more valuable than whatever the final product is. It's a far more crunchy process and everything than consuming whatever the thing is. Like, if you're a fan of movies and you're like, man, I wish there was a movie like this, actually trying to make a movie is so much more satisfying than any movie that you'll ever watch, is kind of what I'm saying. So I just think that creative processes are far more complex and satisfying at the end of the day, even though they're really difficult, especially compared to just whatever the end product is. But the reward is like way bigger. Even if the project just completely collapses, there's so much there to learn and whatnot. And a lot of technology makes these processes easier, but can also like just short circuit all of the interesting stuff that can emerge through the process. And so that's kind of where my mind went in rereading this book. In some ways, it's like dated in a particular way. And that just speaks to how fast the world is moving and how much we're in a time of flux and change as it relates to the arts and creativity. But I think that it's really never going to leave us as human beings. It's just going to shift into different modes that maybe I don't even understand or I'm discounting. Like maybe there are just processes that I'm not even considering as it relates to AI and stuff. So I don't know. But for these kind of nonfiction books, just to get me thinking and going, I find that really valuable as well. So it was a great reread.